this gruesome spectacle, sat in his jail cell, refusing to speak to investigators. Finally, they confronted him with Bernice Worden's corpse. And with that, Ed Gein began to come clean.
He was perfectly happy to cooperate with the police. You know, all he asked for was a slice of apple pie with some cheddar cheese on top of it.
And according to the investigator, Ed ate the thing, and after that he told them anything they wanted to know.
They said, well, what's all these body parts in here, Ed? You know, how many people did you kill? All the dead stuff in his house, they just assumed that it was like murder victims.
All told, Gein would confess to only 2 killings: Bernice Worden and Mary Hogan. The rest of his grisly artifacts, he said, were crafted from corpses he had stolen from local cemeteries.
Plainfield woke up that Sunday morning to find out what had been living in their community for all these years, and that was Ed Gein.
My dad, he couldn't tell us what had happened. He just said, I want you to come in and watch the news tonight with me. And the news came up on the television. He was the person. I just said to my dad, oh my gosh, that's Ed.
We were all upset. We were all devastated. We were horrified about what had happened. It was a terrible, horrible thing.
It was just such a complete shock, I guess. It was something that was a little bit difficult to talk about.
It wasn't just the murder of Bernice Worden that was so disturbing. It was the other terrible things that he did that was upsetting so many people.
I mean, this is a guy who had been living in their community almost all his life and been a babysitter for their children, had been eating at their table. Well, look what he did and how he did. They couldn't believe it.
Well, I figured he was just perfectly harmless and rather simple.
Plainfield's shock would soon be America's. Almost immediately, hordes of reporters descended on the town. It was the beginning of Ed Gein's transformation from anonymous psychotic to cultural icon. And it could all be traced back to the story of his childhood. Because in the words of Norman Bates, a boy's best friend is his mother. In November 1957, the gruesome tale of Ed Gein was making headlines across America. The country's morbid fascination with the man the papers were calling the Mad Butcher of Plainfield was not lost on author Robert Bloch, who was living in Wisconsin at the time.
It was exactly the time that the Gein case was breaking in the newspapers, and Bloch immediately recognized that it would be a wonderful basis for a horror story.
The result was Bloch's 1959 novel, Psycho, which Alfred Hitchcock would bring to the big screen the following year.
The story of Psycho is the story of Norman Bates, a single, deeply disturbed mama's boy, for lack of a better word, who runs a hotel and murders unsuspecting young women who cause him to have any sexual urges or impulses.
One of the main things that Bloch took from the Gein case was the psychological relationship between Norman and his mother, which very much parallels that between Annie and his mother.
Augusta Gein had been dead 12 years when police entered the house she had once shared with her son. As they worked their way from room to room, searching for clues that might explain what would drive someone to commit such crimes, they came upon a doorway that had been boarded up.
And by that time, of course, they had seen so many horrific things, they had no idea what they were going to discover behind the doors of this room. And when they broke it down, what they discovered was that it was a room that was kept in a state of perfect, pristine preservation. And that turned out to be the room of Ed's mother.
The bed was made. There was a table, night table. Had a Bible on it. The room was very dusty, musty. The wallpaper was sort of a rose-tinted thing, but it was all kind of discolored. and that was his shrine to his mother.
After his arrest, Ed Gein underwent a month-long court-ordered psychological evaluation. It was here that a picture began to emerge of life behind closed doors on the Plainfield farm, and Ed Gein's descent into madness. Born in 1906 in La Crosse, Wisconsin, Edward Theodore Gein was the son of an alcoholic grocery store owner and a strong-willed, God-fearing housewife. When he was 8, his mother Augusta insisted that the family leave their La Crosse home.
One reason, apparently, she insisted that the family move from La Crosse was because, in her mind, you know, it was like Sodom and Gomorrah.
With the proceeds from the sale of their grocery store, the Gein family settled onto a 200-acre farm in Plainfield. Isolated, the family dynamic grew stranger and stranger.
Mr. Gein had a very strange relationship with his mother. It was a love-hate relationship. He listened to her and worshipped her and followed her very closely.
She was religiously devout, if not fanatical woman. Very, very domineering, very, very strong-willed. I mean, she completely dominated her husband as well, Henry.
Augusta would preach a lot out of the book of Revelations that said that women were whores, women were tramps, women were definitely evil beings out to, you know, hurt people.
The Gein household really became a sort of breeding ground for psychopathology. You know, you have these 4 people stuck together, completely under the sway of this woman. So it really becomes an incubation place for madness.
Gein attended school until the age of 14. An unremarkable student, his IQ would later be tested as average.
And when he finished school at approximately 7th grade, he just went home then and worked on the farm there. So he did not have contact with the outside world, shall we say, to any extent.
In 1940, when Ed was 34, his father died of a heart attack. Now it was just Ed, mother, and older brother Henry.
I think Henry was probably a genteel man who worked hard on the farm and tried to please his mother as well. But he wasn't Ed. He had his own ideas of how his life should be led.
In May 1944, Henry and Ed found themselves battling a brush fire on their property. According to Ed, the fire got out of control and he lost sight of his brother. He went for the police, and though he told them he didn't know where Henry was, he was able to lead them straight to his brother's dead body.
I've heard rumors that there were bruises on Henry's head that weren't ever explained away. But at the time, it was such a big tragedy for the family, it just became, you know, well, they've already been through enough.
Ed and Mother were now alone, but their union would be short-lived. Just months after burying her son Henry, Augusta suffered a stroke that left her partially paralyzed.
When Mother became ill, had a stroke, and was paralyzed, he cared for her very closely and literally, seemingly worshipped the ground she walked on.
Sometime in 1945, Augusta Gein suffered another stroke. She died that December, a devastating blow to her 39-year-old son.
His mother had completely undermined his manhood in every way. And at her funeral, he was reacting like a little schoolboy who had just lost his mommy, you know, and just crying hysterically.
Everything that he knew in the world seemingly was gone. That was his one link with sanity that was remaining at that point.
Until 1945, Ed Gein's world had been entirely defined by his deeply religious and domineering mother.